IKIM Inspirasi Inforia Islami. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin. Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabi ajma'in. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and a very good evening to IKIM Radio listeners. You are with me, Annie Zahura Abdul Aziz, your host for today's episode of Open Forum. Thank you for tuning in to IKIM Radio and also to those who are watching us through our Facebook page and our YouTube channel this evening. Welcome to the program. We are now in our 7th season of Open Forum. Thank you for your kind support to the program. And in today's episode, inshallah, we have invited a very special guest to talk about the topic, which is religious defamation and freedom of speech, drawing the line. So we have with us Dr. Murni Wan Muhammad Noor, a senior lecturer at the Department of Government and Civilization Studies, Faculty of Human Ecology, Universiti Putra Malaysia. Assalamualaikum, Dr. Murni.
Waalaikumsalam, Puan. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for accepting our invitation and for being with us this evening, Doctor. All right, before I proceed with our discussion or with the question with regard to the topic of discussion, so just let me share a few brief background of Dr. Murni. Yeah? So Dr. Murni Wan Muhammad Noor obtained her bachelor's in law, master's in comparative law and a PhD in human rights and constitutional law from the International Islamic University of Malaysia, IIUM. Her areas of specialization includes human rights issues, freedom of expression, hate speech, and media representation on racial and religious issues. And among her recent publications are chapter in books and also journal articles entitled Radicalization and Paramilitary Culture, The Case of 1D's Telegram Groups in Malaysia, Growing Fear of Islamization, Representation of Online Media in Malaysia, and a journal article, Blasphemy and Religious Defamation, What Are the Limits to Our Freedom? So, Doctor, we will go to our first question with regard to this topic. I think this is also considered as a current issue or something which is very relevant in our discussion, and we see that day to day this is becoming a concern to the society. So, can you just explain to our listeners what is blasphemy and religious defamation, Doctor, if you may?
Right. Thank you so much. You're right. This is definitely a current topic, and it's a difficult one to talk about, honestly. That's why it's really important to consider the issue, and when we want to talk about it and address it, it's important to be careful and considerate. So, firstly, there's actually no universally accepted definition of blasphemy or religious defamation, right?
Correct.
But generally, blasphemy is understood as the act of insulting or showing contempt or lack of reverence for God, the prophets, holy books, symbols, and the like. Blasphemy laws, they were actually very common in many countries once upon a time, but now it has become something that's highly opposed, very controversial.
Right.
And so if you look at the development, some European countries still have these laws, although many of them are rarely used. Some European countries have abolished these laws altogether, or some have replaced blasphemy laws with legislations that are deemed more acceptable.
Okay.
And so the development, it changes from year to year. If you look at 1999, at that time, many Muslim majority countries, as well as the OIC, were pushing for a resolution at the United Nations to ban defamation of religion. So this term, religious defamation, is not actually defined in the resolution, but scholars have generally understood it to mean disparagement or criticism of religion. But I believe that it is not just talking about mere criticism, right? Because, we accept criticism, right? But it is a type of criticism which reaches a very serious level that could cause intolerance, incitement to hatred, and social disharmony. So that's the kind of criticism that we're talking about. But as I said, the situation keeps changing. So in 2011, the United Nations Human Rights Council adopted, with the support of OIC,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Resolution 1618. And this resolution shifted away from the former resolution, which was talking about religious defamation. So now the emphasis is more restrained or narrow, to focus on combating religious intolerance. And
Mm-hmm.
so the emphasis is not on protecting religion per se, but protecting individuals or persons, um, from a particular race or religion.
Mm-hmm. So basically, the change. I mean, we see this change of how they adopt the so-called definition. Although, as you said, there is no universal definition given, especially by, for example, by the General Assembly, by UN, or also OIC with regard to this. Um, but when we talk about religious blasphemy and also religious defamation, what is the position of Islam with regard to this, Doctor?
Right. As Muslims, we need to understand what is the position of blasphemy, religious defamation. So the harm of these two offenses is that it could influence others to adopt a hostile view of not only our religion but any other religion that is being defamed. Okay, so the effects could lead to, as I said before, racial or religious intolerance, discrimination, and all of this, although initially was against the religion, it has a natural trickling effect on religious adherents, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in Islam, blasphemy is clearly restricted
Mm-hmm.
because it is considered something very serious,
Yeah.
as it's an attack against the fundamentals and the integrity of the religion itself.
Mm-hmm.
So that's clear. But um, the punishment for blasphemy in Islam, now that is not specifically provided for,
Mm-hmm.
meaning to say that it's not stated in the Quran, for blasphemy, so and so is the uh, punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And so the punishment has been varied according to the prophetic tradition.
Yeah.
But even though the punishment's not been specifically provided for in the Quran, we can gather from reliable sources that the punishment for the offender of blasphemy, once convicted, varies according to the different circumstances. And by extension, religious defamation may also be prohibited. Hate speech as well, that's on the grounds of religion, can also be prohibited.
Mm-hmm. All right. When we're talking about the position of Islam, I think it's also, insults against religion. Even Islam prohibits insults against other religion,
Right.
especially with regard to understanding this. Yeah. So you talk basically about religion, and also we know that it is very important for us as Muslims, to understand this better. Why should religion be protected? I mean, there are arguments that religion is merely an idea in terms of, that, and it does not need protection of law because it's an idea. So, what is your take on this?
Right. So these are the general arguments that do not allow for religion to be protected. But with
Mm-hmm.
respect, um, and I hope people who disagree will, disagree respectfully.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot agree to that contention that
Yes.
religion is merely an idea.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it is one of the most, if it's an idea, it is one of the most fundamental ideas, right?
Yes.
Which
Yeah.
shape the worldview of man
Mm-hmm.
and greatly influence our actions. And so the unpopularity of religion and religious values today, unfortunately, does not negate the fact that religion has contributed greatly to mankind. It
Mm-hmm.
has been the catalyst for the rise of magnificent civilizations. That's something that any historian cannot negate.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea that one should not protect ideas, um, it it's not accurate,
Mm-hmm.
because democracy is something that is fiercely guarded according to international law, and
Mm-hmm.
many international instruments or covenants or resolutions, they place an obligation on countries to observe these ideas to protect democracy. So when we look at religion, religious adherents believe it is as fundamental, if not more fundamental, than democracy.
Mm-hmm.
So, this because religion plays a pivotal role in the lives of mankind. This is why there are still billions of people in this world who choose to be. They choose every day to be part of a religion, right?
Yeah.
And this
Mm-hmm.
has been highlighted by research conducted by Pew Research Group. So naturally, religious believers, they want to feel protected, and they want to protect their beloved faith from
Mm-hmm.
abusive attacks and something that is insulting of a cruel and degrading nature.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and this is something we need to try to understand when we talk about dialogue and things like that, we need to
Mm-hmm.
understand that for religious persons, when something so sacred to them is intentionally being referred to in a contemptuous manner,
Mm-hmm.
then the victims would include the religious persons as well.
Yeah.
So
True.
this concept that it's only protecting a mere idea, there's no victims, that's not true, because by extension, the
Mm-hmm.
victims could be and often are the religious adherents.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really important to consider this issue from the lens of the affected persons.
Yeah.
Even if we might not agree, we must at least consider their point of view.
Yeah.
Um, talking from the Muslim perspective, faith is of utmost importance to us, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the objective of Islamic law, Makasih al Sharia, is to protect five main values.
Yeah.
And the highest value is not even protection of life, which is
Yeah.
after that, but it is
Mm-hmm.
the protection of religion, which comes
Yes.
first,
Mm-hmm.
right? So to Muslims, Islam is not even just a religion, it is a complete and comprehensive way of life. It is in
Mm-hmm.
everything that we do, it is what we live and breathe.
Mm-hmm.
So such attacks are considered something so heinous because they attack the fundamental values of our religion.
Mm-hmm.
But that said, there are some insults today that we can see, which have happened recently.
Yeah.
It has a religious nature,
Mm-hmm.
but it might not be as serious as blasphemy or religious defamation,
Mm-hmm.
right? For example, jokes or satire that do not attack or criticize religion, the prophets, sacred texts, and so on,
Mm-hmm.
but they do make a mockery of
Yeah.
certain religious principles and practices.
Yeah.
So this is, although might not necessarily be blasphemous or religiously defamatory,
Mm-hmm.
it is something that should not be encouraged,
Mm-hmm.
because in the Malaysian legal system today, this is something that could be dealt with according to the justifiable limits of the law.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and I think this is something that our society today it doesn't really understand.
Mm-hmm.
Jokes, they can have a negative impact,
Yeah.
especially when they're touching on, core values such as religion, because it can lower the esteem of the religion in
Mm-hmm.
the eyes of other.
Yeah.
It can create discord and disunity among people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I also need to emphasize, because I think a lot of people misunderstand when we talk about this issue. Um, in Malaysia, and I believe that the principle applies generally,
Mm-hmm.
all religions are protected from, or like the law in
Mm-hmm.
Malaysia
Mm-hmm.
aims to protect all religions
Mm-hmm.
from offense and insults of a serious nature.
Yeah.
So the protection is not afforded to Islam alone, which is
Mm-hmm.
what people popularly believe.
Mm-hmm.
That said, when we talk about any kind of offense, the way in which we deal with it must consider the gravity and
Mm-hmm.
the surrounding circumstances in order to be just and appropriate, right? So Harsh criminal punishment should be avoided when possible,
Mm-hmm.
unless the speech or the act or the abuse or the attack is so serious.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we must also, allow for the door to repentance and reformation to remain open,
Mm-hmm.
because this is reflective of the Islamic spirit that exists in laws.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in certain situations where we can avoid harsh criminal sanctions, we should consider holding dialogues to
Mm-hmm.
create understanding, which may be more fitting in today's circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, you need to look at the surrounding situation where the offense is being committed.
Mm-hmm.
If we can inculcate understanding instead, this is better.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because in this regard, attacks against Islam or the Prophet can be expelled through intellectual arguments, while at the same time demonstrating that Islam is a religion of peace,
Mm-hmm.
mercy, and tolerance. So, when educational initiatives and reconciliation fail to change the mind of the offender or fail to make amends or retribution, then perhaps um, punishment may be considered.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, when we want to carry out punishments and things like that, the laws must not be disproportionate or unjust. So you have to look at the situation, according to how it's being said, who is saying it, what is the impact, and things like that before we determine, how we're going to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is interesting when you said that, we have to look at the victims of the particular act. I mean, when religions are being insulted, so the victims here are the religious adherents, as you have mentioned. And I think that is very interesting because we sometimes fail to see the victims in these cases. It's not mere individual acts, but it's actually the large part of the large parts of the society which are very, very affected by the action. Um, it is also there are views. I mean that such laws and regulations. You've been talking about laws and regulations with regard to this, yeah. And there are laws and regulations that they have said, which actually curtail one's freedom of speech. And from your point of view, can freedom of speech include acts of insults against religion, on religious defamation or blasphemy?
Okay. Firstly, it's we need to know that Islam does recognize and uphold the right to freedom of speech,
Mm-hmm.
and this conception goes beyond mere rights, but it extends upon men, at least in the
Mm-hmm.
Islamic perspective,
Yeah.
responsibilities when we
Yeah.
exercise these rights, because
Mm-hmm.
Islam doesn't emphasize on the individual alone, but it considers the individual in relation to God, in relation to society, in
Mm-hmm.
relation to himself as well.
Yeah.
So freedom is not a privilege to do whatever that we like. Rather,
Mm-hmm.
it is a trust unto us to do what is right.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that people have forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
So Fethullah Gulen, he expresses the importance of good speech, not any kind of speech, but good speech. So we're discouraged to from saying certain words, or whether it's true or untrue. Sometimes it could be true, but
Mm-hmm.
if it could offend others or violate their honor or expose their faults, we are discouraged from saying it.
Mm-hmm.
If, for example, a simple example, if your mother's cooking is not nice, you want to hurt her feelings by pointing that out? No, it's just simple example. So this principle applies to jokes as well, because
Mm-hmm.
Islam places an obligation on Muslims to respect the rights and sensitivities of all religious adherents
Yeah.
from offense.
Mm-hmm.
So if a person, for example, were to make an anti-Semitic joke or a
Mm-hmm.
racist joke
Mm-hmm.
that ridicules black people, for example,
Mm-hmm.
uh, or trivialize the struggle, then
Mm-hmm.
there will be, you know, worldwide outrage, right?
Yeah.
Public condemnation,
Yeah.
or as young people call it these days. I'm no longer young. They say cancel the perpetrator, right?
Yeah.
Um, but when insults are made against religion, then suddenly people say that it should be allowed under freedom of
Mm-hmm.
expression.
Yeah.
So I think that this is not quite right, and it
Mm-hmm.
reflects that we have lost sight of the purpose and objective of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And Professor Said Muhammad Nakib Alatas, he has beautifully explained the purpose of freedom when he said
Mm-hmm.
that it acts as one's real and true nature demands. That is, as one's hak and fitrah demands. And so only the exercise of the choice which is good can be considered as free choice. So a
Mm-hmm.
choice for the better is therefore an act of freedom. And it is also known as an act of justice done to oneself. So
Mm-hmm.
he explained, that only a good choice is considered, um, a free choice, and
Mm-hmm.
that freedom is for the purpose of justice. It's not just freedom to achieve any ends, right? It should be
Mm-hmm.
to achieve justice.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to ask ourselves the question: does blasphemy, religious defamation, or insults against religion contribute towards goodness, or does it facilitate justice in any way?
Mm-hmm.
I think not.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you have mentioned about freedom comes with rights and responsibilities. Yeah. So it's just not about you exercising your freedom without really thinking of the impact of your action and how you're supposed to respond to the other individuals as well in the society. So when we talk about blasphemy, religious defamation, and insults against religion, how should the public respond to such acts, Dr. Murni, if we
Right,
are facing this situation?
right. Um, uh, People today are going to face more and more situations such as this,
Yeah.
because when we use the internet, social media, especially, it's not just the internet
Mm-hmm.
but social media. It encourages people to say whatever that they want to say without any
Yeah.
filter,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, instances of blasphemy, religious defamation, insults against religion, they have provoked angry reactions from religious adherents worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
And the situation is not exclusive to Muslims, as some
Yeah.
people believe, right?
Yeah.
Non Muslims also react in an
Mm-hmm.
angry manner. Um, in Greece, for example, many years ago, the actors and the director of this play called Corpus Christi, they were arrested because they had depicted Jesus Christ and his apostles as homosexuals. So
Mm-hmm.
members of the Christian community, they were outraged and they
Mm-hmm.
responded by staging demonstrations and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So similar reactions to blasphemy and religious defamation,
Yeah.
particularly if it's of a serious nature, like I mentioned before,
Mm-hmm.
uh, we can see angry responses among certain segments of the Muslim population.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, but predictably, religious adherents sometimes respond disproportionately. They respond, it's not just being angry, but they respond sometimes even violently, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Violence and vigilantism, even in response to provocation, is not
Mm-hmm.
justified.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it demonstrates that certain people would react this way when
Mm-hmm.
their most sacred beliefs are being attacked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, when we want to respond to such insults or attacks, Muslims must conform to the principles in the Quran and Sunnah, which
Mm-hmm.
is to settle disputes and disagreements in the best way. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
because it is more important to respond with wisdom, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like I said before, intellectual arguments should be done in a polite manner because this can be more persuasive than insulting them back. So,
Yeah.
what we need to do is number one, we should be calm.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, we should exercise restraint in our words
Mm-hmm.
and our actions. Think
Mm-hmm.
before we act.
Mm-hmm.
Number three, we should demonstrate wisdom when we deal with such conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
And number four, never exceed the legal limits. Do not take the law
Mm-hmm.
into our own hands.
Mm-hmm.
Never resort to vigilantism, what more violence?
Mm-hmm.
Because this is only going to add fuel to the fire and make things worse when we are just as insulting and abusive as the perpetrator.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as Muslims, we should refer to the Quran and Sunnah. In the Quran, it is stated that dispute not with people of the book except with means better than mere disputation. Um, so there's so many other verses in the Quran. There's so many other hadith as well that talk about these kind of principles, and it is something that can be used as a guidance on how we should respond to blasphemy and religious defamation. Tolerance and understanding is key, and it must be practiced amongst Muslims and non-Muslims, uh, because this is pivotal to maintain our harmonious environment in Malaysia. So we need to remember that resorting to hateful, demeaning, and abusive speech, even in retaliation to such speech being done to us,
Yeah.
is never going to convince anyone of a particular argument, but it would
Yeah.
only continue to build more resentment, more anger, and more hostility. And that doesn't do anything to help solve the problem.
And I believe, in a country like Malaysia, we have the legal framework, the legal avenues when we are faced to such situations. Yeah, Doctor. So you have mentioned, internationally there are countries who adopt, certain rules and regulations and laws with regard to religious blasphemy. And also, I think in Malaysia, when it comes to hate speech or things like that, that we have the what do you call that? The remedy, the legal remedy with regard to this. So what you have
Right.
mentioned, I think is in line with this. I think what you have explained basically shows that people who conduct or who actually insult or do talk bad things about religion or defame religion, they are actually ignorant towards the religion itself. And when we talk about ignorance, the remedy is actually knowledge, and wisdom. This is a kind of approach that we need to understand as well. So, Doctor, as a conclusion to our discussion this evening, what would you like to explain or to maybe share with our listeners, Doctor?
Right. Okay. I just wanted to make it clear that freedom of expression is undeniably important, and it is something that we must try to enforce, but with justice. Um, the law cannot be or shouldn't be used to punish every single instance of something that is offensive, But at the same time, we must consider not just the individual liberty when we talk about freedom of expression, but we must understand what are the responsibilities attached to that right. We cannot be, we shouldn't be a society that jealously guards freedom of speech to the extent that it will cause destruction to society, because this will only aggravate the problem of racial and religious intolerance. So, as a conclusion, I just want to highlight that I think it's important to continue upholding human rights, but to do so responsibly. To do so responsibly, bearing in mind the proper limits to our freedom, like I've mentioned, because when we do this, it would encourage healthy racial and religious relations. It would help to preserve unity, and it would help to achieve justice, which is the ultimate objective of the freedom which we all hold so dear.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Murni Wan Muhammad Noor, for being with us today. I think what you have, in your conclusion, what you have said is actually very important for us to understand about, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, the rights and responsibilities that come with it. And I think it is also clear, you have mentioned about how in the Quran and Sunnah it is there. We just need to understand it better, how we should respond to this kind of acts, and in talking about religious religious defamation and freedom of speech, drawing the line. I would like to thank again Dr. Murni, and also to my producer Haja Mazina Ismail, who's assisting us with this recording, and to our fellow listeners. Do tune in again to our program Open Forum, which is at every Sunday at 5 p.m. with more interesting topics. With that, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you so much.